Hey everyone, so I'm back with the second part of today's uploads, and in this video we will be talking about to what degree did I have access to learn about people across the gender identity spectrum. So let's get into it. Okay, to what degree did I have access to learn about people across the gender identity spectrum? So, I'm just going to say, like, straightforward, I did not have access to this kind of information growing up in school. It wasn't until I got to college that I truly had the ability to learn about the gender identity spectrum. Growing up, I thought you were either a boy or a girl. Even with trans identities, which I was introduced to through my own family, is that if you are if you identify as trans, you're either a trans woman or a trans man. Um, so I was very indoctrinated into this idea of the gender binary. And it wasn't until I got to college that I was basically exposed to the truth of the gender binary, not necessarily being true, I guess. Um, I mean, the way that we've constructed our society and constructed our lives is um, based on binaries, and oftentimes the gender binary. Like when you walk into a toy store, they've got a section for girls and they've got a section for boys, the pink and the blue. Um, so everything, well, not everything, but a lot of things are a binary. But the reality is that there are males, there are females, and there are a lot of people in between. There are a lot of gender identities, and way too many for me to list in this video, so I'm not even going to attempt it. Um, but at the same time, it is important that we recognize that there are people in between, because there are children who grow up and feel very uncomfortable with the gender identity that they have been assigned by society and by their own family and friends. People will look at them and say, oh, you're a girl, so I'm gonna use she, her pronouns with you. And I'm not going to ask you whether or not you feel comfortable with those pronouns, and I'm not going to tell you that you have other options. So that leads to a lot of intrapsychic conflicts with their own identity. And some people don't even understand that it's okay to have that intrapsychic conflict, because I've always identified as female. I didn't know growing up that I had options to identify um, as anything else. But to this day, I still identify as a cisgendered female. Now, I did have conflicts when I was growing up and I was watching cartoons or TV shows that displayed, you know, girls acting and, performing their gender a certain way that didn't necessarily do. Or I saw the things that I did performed by a male figure in the media. So I feel like I've mentioned this before. I'm almost sure that I have. Growing up, I used to help my mom a lot putting things together and working with my hands and with tools and things like that. I grew an interest in, you know, learning how to do things on my car. I replaced my entire headlight. And while to some car buffs, that's not a lot, it's like that's not very impressive. It was impressive to me. It was something that I was very proud of and something that I didn't see other women doing in the media that I was consuming growing up. So that created some conflict. But it was as I grew up and as I entered college and was exposed to the gender spectrum and the different ways we can perform gender that I realized there is no one way to be a girl or to be a woman. Um, it's all about how I identify and how I, as an individual, choose to express my gender. So I can be a woman and be into tools and be into building and be into working on my car. But I can also be into doing makeup or choose not to be into doing makeup. Um, and I can be into softball and getting sweaty and dirty on the softball field, but I can also be adverse to wanting to sweat or wanting to be dirty at times. It's and it's entirely okay. So I don't have to conform myself to the standards of society, and that's something that the education system did not tell me. They did not prepare me for the fact that the gender binary doesn't always work and that the gender binary is not our only choice. So, I to get back to the question, I didn't have access to that kind of information in school, but I'm so glad that I have the access to that kind of information now that I'm in college and that I am still a young enough adult to mold my mind around the fact that there are more options in the binary and to give other people the choices and the room to express themselves in the way that they feel most comfortable. And I feel like it is very important that we have access to this information at a young age and it explained to us in ways that we can understand, conceptualize, and digest, and not to just completely look away from it because, oh, we're kids and we wouldn't understand. I feel like the education system and some adults in general underestimate just what children can understand. Children are very smart. You just have to explain it to them in a way that they can understand it. Don't use big words or jargon that you can't define to them easily, but make sure that they understand that it's not just choose boy or girl, or you don't have to identify as a girl just because you were born female, and you don't have to identify as a boy just because you were born female. You're born male, and they need to have those options as young adults so that way they don't grow up to be insecure, confused, and conflicted adults. We need to resolve these issues and these conflicts as children are growing up so that way they can be well rounded adults who are able to properly express themselves. So I hope that in the future, there will be more openness, more conversation, and more education about that in our school systems and in younger children's education. So that way, it's not such a big shock to them when they get older, or it's not such a big problem for them when they get older, when they realize that the conflicts that they were facing when they were young, they didn't have to go through that. And that it was the circumstances of society, of their education system, that forced them to go through this traumatic, oftentimes traumatic conflict. That's a lot. Uh, but yeah, I think it's important that we think about why it is we don't have access to this kind of information, and why it is that sometimes when we fight for and push for this kind of education for our children, that people push back against it and say that we have some sort of agenda. The only agenda I see is educating children and preparing them for what's really out there for the future, and to not blind them or, try to shield them away from reality. We want to teach them a way that is digestible and understandable to them, that is age appropriate to them. Um, but I feel like there is some sort of agenda when it comes to trying to withhold this information from children. Because ignorant children can grow up to be ignorant adults that perpetuates this ignorance. So, yeah, yeah, it's really important that we think about this. And once again, as always, I want you to think about whether or not you had access to this information about people within the gender spectrum growing up in school, and also to think about why it is that you may or may not have had access to this information, and talk about it in the comments and have open and honest dialogue. And as always, please be respectful to others that decide that they want to share within the comment section. I know that these questions can be extremely vulnerable and personal, so we always want to make sure that we are opening up a safe space for individuals who wish to share and to express themselves in such a way. So please be responsible, be respectful, and I will see you next time.